If you're seeing this, something in your life is already leaning toward a threshold quietly, subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a particle drifting toward one side of the double slit a moment before the outcome becomes irreversible. And if I told you that your next breath might be the difference between repeating an old reality or stepping into a completely new one, would you believe me? Not as mysticism, not as superstition, but as a lived, felt experience happening inside your own awareness right now. Most people think change begins with decisions, or discipline, or willpower, but the truth is far gentler and far stranger. Every shift begins in the invisible fraction of a second before a choice is made, in the brief stillness before the breath moves, in the quiet pause where you are not yet who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. That tiny gap is the doorway, and most people walk past it every single day without ever realizing it was their last chance to shift the direction of their lives. Consider this moment right now, as you watch these words unfold. You might think you chose to click, chose to watch, chose to stay. But what if the deeper truth is that something in you, something ancient and alert, something tired of looping through the same emotional weather guided you here, because you're approaching a threshold in consciousness that only reveals itself when the old way of being becomes too small to contain the next version of you? What if this is the moment just before the universe rearranges itself around a new signal coming from within you, and the signal begins with one conscious breath? There is a pattern you've been living in. Every human has one. A predictable rhythm made of reflexes, assumptions, unexamined stories. A loop that feels like fate but is actually just repetition. You wake in the same emotional temperature. You respond to stress with the same breath pattern. You interpret events through the same lens. And without realizing it, you fire the same probability wave into the field around you, collapsing reality into familiar outcomes. Not because you're broken, not because life is unfair, but because you've never learned to pause long enough to breathe before the shift. The double slit isn't just a physics experiment, it's a metaphor for your daily life. When you act from unconscious breath, you are the particle shot forward with no awareness, destined to land where you always land. But when you breathe consciously before the next moment unfolds, you become the observer shaping possibilities instead of repeating past patterns. That single breath becomes the slit you choose, the opening through which your next reality emerges. So let me ask you gently, how long have you been living as the particle, reacting, rushing, tightening, collapsing into the same outcomes? And how would your life feel if, just once, you gave yourself permission to stop in the gap right before the next automatic reaction and breathe with full awareness? That breath is the last chance before the shift, the moment where the universe pauses long enough to ask you, are you sure you want to collapse the same reality again? If you're seeing this, you're standing at that exact threshold. This isn't an accident. Something in your field, your story, your inner timing has aligned with this moment. Before we go any further, I want you to simply notice your breath, not to change it, not to deepen it, just to witness it. Because the instant you observe your breath, you're no longer inside the loop. You're at the edge of the slit, and the shift begins here. You've arrived at the threshold, the edge of the double slit, actually noticing your breath instead of treating it as background noise. This seems small, but it's radical, because most of your life has been driven by a pattern you've rarely seen, what I'll call the reality loop. From inside it, life feels fixed, as if things just happened to you. From outside, you can see that something much more precise is occurring. Trigger, breath, state, meaning, action, evidence repeating, until probability hardens into what feels like fate. This isn't a judgment on who you are. It's simply what happens when a powerful creative system runs on autopilot. Slow the loop down and it becomes almost obvious. A trigger appears, a number in your bank account, a change in someone's tone, an unread message, a memory stirred by a smell or song. In the instant you register it, your breath shifts held for half a second, becoming shallow, speeding up just enough to slip under conscious radar. That micro change alters your state. Your nervous system tips toward fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. From that altered state, your mind rushes in to explain what's happening and assigns meaning. I'm unsafe. They don't care. It's all going to fall apart. This always happens to me. Once meaning is assigned, action follows automatically. You send the sharp reply or say nothing. You cancel or overpromise. You distract, overwork, or numb. Those actions create outcomes that look like confirmation. The account is tight. The conversation is strained. The chance passes. Outcome becomes evidence, and the loop tightens. See? This is just my reality. What you almost never see, because no one taught you to look for it, is the hinge in the middle. If you could sit beside yourself the way you'd sit on a riverbank watching water, you'd notice that the most powerful point in the sequence isn't the trigger or the outcome. It's the unobserved breath between the trigger and the meaning. When that breath collapses into survival mode, your perception narrows. The inner sky shrinks until you see only the darkest clouds. In that state, you don't ask, "What's actually happening here?" You ask, "How do I not get hurt like last time?" And the answer to that question is almost always some recycled behavior from the past. So the past quietly stamps itself onto the present again, and it feels natural to call that who I am. You can watch this in money, in relationships, in your creativity. The specifics change, but the circuitry is the same. A bill arrives, a message is delayed, an idea excites you, and your breath either opens into curiosity or contracts into self-protection. From openness, the meanings you assign sound like, "Let me see clearly. We can repair this. Maybe this is possible." From contraction, they sound like, "There's never enough. They're leaving. I'm not that kind of person." Each set of meanings leads to different actions, and those actions send different instructions into the field that surrounds you. Over time, a pattern of breath and meaning becomes a pattern of outcomes, and that pattern becomes the story you tell about your life. To you, it appears solid, but to the field it is simply familiar. Here is the quiet crisis. Most people never realize they are not the loop. They are the field in which the loop plays. They mistake the particle that keeps landing in the same spot for their identity, and forget that there is also an observer still, spacious, watching who can alter the experiment by how they arrive at the next moment. Because the breath between trigger and meaning has been unconscious, reality feels like a single rigid track instead of a set of probabilities waiting to be collapsed. The truth is gentler and more demanding. The loop keeps running not because you are cursed or broken, but because no one ever showed you that the first place to intervene is not in the trigger, or the other person, or the circumstance. It's in that tiny, sacred gap where your next breath begins. This isn't about forcing some dramatic breathing technique or pretending everything is fine. It's about realizing that your breath is the steering wheel of your state. Your state colors your meaning writes your script, and your script becomes the instructions the field responds to. In the next part, we'll turn ideas like observer effect and coherence from abstract words into something you can actually feel, so you can stand on the riverbank of your own life, breathe before the shift, and watch an old reality loop loosen its grip as a new one starts to form. To understand why a single conscious breath before the shift matters, you have to feel the quantum idea not as a theory in a textbook, but as an experience in your own awareness. People hear phrases like observer effect, coherence, or probability collapse, and imagine chalkboards filled with equations. But the living truth behind those concepts is profoundly human. It's happening inside you every time you pause before reacting, every time you notice a tightening in your chest, every time a moment of stillness stops you from repeating an old pattern. The quantum field isn't some distant realm of particles. It's a metaphor for the invisible layer of your being, the layer where intention, emotion, and breath shape what becomes possible next. You're not trying to influence particles. You're learning to influence your own inner alignment, which quietly influences everything around you. Imagine your awareness as a soft light shining through you. When you're calm, grounded, and breathing openly, that light moves smoothly, like ripples across a clear lake. In that state, your thoughts, emotions, and choices line up with one another. You feel coherent. Your inner landscape is ordered. And when coherence rises, something remarkable happens in your perception. Possibilities that were previously invisible start to appear, the way stars appear when the sky becomes dark and undisturbed. Coherence isn't about perfection. It's about being internally aligned long enough to sense the full range of your options. Without it, your life shrinks to a narrow tunnel of old reactions. Now picture the same awareness when fear, anxiety, or urgency takes over. Your breath shortens, your muscles tighten, your thoughts scatter. That inner light becomes jagged, flickering across your system like a disrupted signal. This is incoherence, not a flaw, but a natural response when survival instincts kick in. But here's the subtle trap. The more chaotic the inner field becomes, the more your perception filters out possibilities that don't match the chaos. It's not that opportunities disappear. It's that your internal receiver goes out of tune. You can't hear the quiet signals life is sending. You keep collapsing the same outcomes because your internal frequency keeps collapsing the same interpretations. This is where the observer effect becomes more than a metaphor. When you observe a particle in a double-slit experiment, the act of observation changes the pattern, not because the scientist forces anything, but because the system responds to attention. Something similar happens inside you. When you observe your breath, when you witness your emotion, when you pause in the space between the stimulus and the story, the entire pattern shifts. You're no longer caught inside the automatic loop. You're standing at the edge of it, watching, and that shift from identification to observation opens a new field of probabilities. Think of a moment from your own life when you reacted before you had a chance to think. Maybe you snapped at someone you love, or spiraled about money, or doubted your own worth. In those moments, your breath collapsed into the smallest possible space. You became the particle shot forward without choice. But think of the rare moments when you paused, even briefly. A breath expanded. A wave of emotion moved through without pulling you under. For a moment, you weren't inside the storm you were watching. Clouds drift across a vast sky. That is the observer effect as lived experience. Your awareness touched the inner field and changed the outcome. The quantum field, metaphorically speaking, is the space of all potential interpretations and responses before you collapse into one. Every breath you take is like dipping a brush into that field and painting the next frame of your reality. When your breath is shallow and chaotic, you paint quickly, unconsciously, with trembling strokes. When your breath is deep, spacious, and observed, your hand steadies. You begin to choose the strokes. A sense of authorship returns. This is why coherent breathing feels mystical, even though it's grounded in simple physiology. When you breathe consciously, your heart rhythm stabilizes, your mind quiets, and your awareness awakens to the deeper field within you. The ancient teachers didn't need modern physics to recognize this. They understood that the breath is the bridge between the visible and the invisible, between your lived reality and the field of potential waiting beneath it. Think of yourself as both the sky and the clouds. The clouds are your thoughts, your feelings, your fears. They come and go. Sometimes they gather heavily, sometimes they drift softly. But the sky, your awareness, is vast, steady, unchanging. When you forget the sky, the clouds feel like the whole world. But when you remember the sky, even storm clouds lose their power to define you. Observation restores the sky. Breath makes the sky livable. Stillness reveals the horizon. When you breathe consciously, you come into resonance with the part of you that is bigger than your reactions, kinder than your fears, wiser than your habits. That resonance is coherence. And coherence is what allows you to choose instead of repeat, to respond instead of react, to shape your path instead of collapsing into the same outcomes. It's not magic, it's not force, it's alignment. The universe, like any field, responds to alignment. In the next part, we'll cross a bridge into ancient teachings not as superstition, but as living metaphors that help you understand the threshold you're standing on. Because long before quantum became a scientific term, civilizations across the world were describing the same inner field you're learning to navigate now, and the same breath-born stillness that turns possibility into reality. Long before anyone spoke of wave functions or observers, ancient cultures were mapping the inner terrain you're beginning to sense now. They didn't have particle accelerators, but they had something equally powerful: direct experience. They understood that the human being is a bridge between the seen and unseen, between the world of form and the field of possibility. And to describe that bridge, they reached for metaphors that still carry a clarity modern language struggles to match. These metaphors aren't meant to be taken literally. They're doorways that help your awareness slip more easily into the truth that breath and consciousness have always been gateways, long before science provided its mirrors. Consider the ancient Egyptian idea of the threshold, what they called the Akhet, the horizon where the sun rises, dies, and is reborn. It wasn't just a geographical boundary, it was a metaphysical one. To the Egyptians, every transition in your inner life has its own horizon, its own moment of crossing. What happens right before the crossing determines everything. They taught that the moment before a shift, before a choice, before a reaction, before a new identity takes shape is the most potent moment in your life. The last breath before stepping through the horizon was considered sacred, not because the breath itself was divine, but because it was the final pause before the old self dissolved and the new self emerged. The Egyptians believed the soul was shaped not by the moment of transformation, but by the breath immediately preceding it. And if you listen carefully, you'll notice that this is exactly the moment modern people ignore. The same understanding appears in Buddhist teachings on anapanasati, the awareness of breath. Buddhist masters knew that watching the breath without controlling it opens a doorway into a different mode of consciousness. They described the breath as a thread running through the present moment, leading the practitioner into the gap between thoughts. The same gap you touched earlier when you noticed the stillness between inhalation and exhalation. To them, this gap wasn't empty. It was luminous, alive, filled with the potential for awakening. It was the place where identity loosens and awareness expands. If the mind is a sky full of clouds, the gap is the moment when the clouds part just enough to reveal the vast blue behind them. Kabbalistic mystics used yet another bridge, the concept of ruach and neshama. Ruach is the breath wind of emotion, movement, human turbulence. Neshama is the breath soul, the quiet, steady awareness beneath all motion. They believe transformation happens when ruach settles enough for neshama to be heard. Not suppressed, not silenced, just gently guided toward coherence. And they believe that every breath holds both qualities at once, the wind and the stillness, the turbulence and the clarity. When you breathe without awareness, ruach dominates, and life feels chaotic. When you breathe with awareness, neshama rises, and the entire inner field begins to harmonize. Each of these traditions, Egyptian, Buddhist, Kabbalistic, describes a doorway, a threshold, a slit through which consciousness passes before reality shifts. None of them needed quantum language to express it. They simply saw the pattern from the inside. What we call the observer effect, they called awakening. What we call coherence, they called alignment with spirit. What we call probability, they called destiny, softened by awareness. And here is where the metaphors converge. In every tradition, breath is the hinge. The Egyptians used breath to prepare the soul for rebirth in every moment. Buddhists used breath to quiet the storm and reveal the sky of awareness. Kabbalists used breath to reconcile the human wind with the divine stillness. They all understood that breath is not merely a tool, it is a threshold. The moment you become aware of your breath, you step out of the automatic loop and into the horizon where new realities can take form. Picture yourself as the traveler approaching the Aket, the horizon of your inner life. Behind you lies the field of old habits, old meanings, old patterns that have repeated for years. Ahead of you lies the unknown, vast, quiet, full of possibilities not yet collapsed, and between them, in the narrow slit of the horizon, is your breath. One inhale, one exhale, and the entire direction of your life can shift toward coherence instead of chaos, toward intention instead of reflex. If you sensed even a flicker of that truth earlier when you paused, when your breath slowed, when awareness widened, then you've already stepped onto this ancient bridge. In the next part, we will turn metaphor into practice, not as spiritual performance, not as magical thinking, but as a gentle, repeatable way of returning to the horizon within you. A way of breathing that lets you feel the threshold instead of rushing past it. A way to stabilize the observer long enough for a new pattern to take root. Now that you've walked across these ancient bridges, it's time to bring the understanding into your body not as an idea, but as a lived sensation. The field responds not to intellectual insight, but to the quality of your presence. And the quality of your presence begins with how you breathe in this very moment. This practice isn't mystical or strenuous. It isn't meant to induce altered states or force anything in your physiology. It's gentle, accessible, and safe for most people. Though always remember, if you have any medical concerns around breathing, dizziness, or anxiety, simply soften the breath and stay within your comfort zone. This is an educational exploration of awareness, not a medical technique. Begin by sitting however your body feels most supported. Let the spine lengthen naturally, as if a quiet thread is lifting the crown of your head. Don't chase perfect posture, just allow spaciousness. Place one hand lightly on your chest and the other low on your belly. Not to control the breath, but to feel where it begins. Many people discover that their breath lives high in the chest, close to the surface, as if life is happening too fast to sink deeper. There's no judgment here, just notice. Awareness itself is the first act of coherence. Now let the breath come and go on its own. Don't deepen it. Don't breathe better. Simply watch. You're sitting on the riverbank now, not in the river. Notice the moment your inhale begins. There's a spark of movement, a quiet yes from the body. Then follow it until it ends, not forcing it longer, just observing when the inhale naturally concludes. And here is the threshold, the micro pause after the inhale, that small bright stillness before the exhale releases. Let yourself rest there for half a second, not holding, not bracing, just noticing. Then follow the exhale down its gentle slope until it meets its own natural end. Another pause, another horizon. Nothing to change, only to witness. This simple cycle, inhale, pause, exhale. Pause is your double slit. It's where unconscious breath patterns become conscious, where the familiar loop loosens, where coherence has a chance to emerge. If the mind wanders, let it. Minds wander the way clouds drift across the sky. You don't need to fight the movement. Just bring your attention back to the breath, the way you'd guide a child's hand back to a drawing gently, without commentary. After a minute or two of simply observing, let your breath soften into what I call oval breathing. Instead of inhaling sharply and exhaling abruptly, imagine the breath tracing the shape of a soft oval, rounded, smooth, unhurried. No edges, no effort. Inhale along the upper curve of the oval. Exhale along the lower curve. The breath becomes continuous, fluid, coherent. Your chest and belly move together, like waves returning to shore. This synchronization is what the ancients felt as harmony and what modern language calls coherence. As the breath settles, something inside you settles too. You'll notice that the mind's commentary becomes quieter, not because you suppressed it, but because awareness has taken the seat. The sky widens. The clouds lose urgency. You become the observer again. From this observing state, emotion feels different. Sensations you once labeled as stress, fear, or pressure reveal themselves simply as movements of energy, ripples passing through your inner field. You don't need to fix them or interpret them. You just notice. And every act of noticing changes the pattern ever so slightly, like touching water with the lightest fingertip. Now let's shift into the micro protocols you can use during daily life. Small, repeatable actions that keep you coherent even in difficult moments. The first is the 3-breath reset. Before responding to a message, before entering a room, before speaking in a tense moment, inhale gently, pause. Exhale slowly, pause. Do this 3 times. Let the breath originate from the belly instead of the chest. It takes less than 10 seconds, but it changes your entire state. You're not escaping the moment, you're preparing your field to meet it. The second is the hand-to-heart check-in. When emotion rises, place a hand lightly on your chest, not to suppress the feeling, but to remind the body that you're here, observing. 2 soft breaths. No analysis, just presence. The third is the inner horizon. When you feel overwhelmed, imagine the breath traveling toward the inner aket, the horizon within you. See the inhale rise like a sun. See the exhale descend like dusk. This imagery isn't meant to be dramatic. It's simply a way of reminding your awareness that every breath is a threshold, a crossing, a moment before the shift. These micro practices don't change your life in one grand moment. They shift the probability of each moment. They return authorship to you. They invite coherence where chaos once lived. And in time, the field around you begins to respond to the new signal emanating from your stillness. In the next part, we'll explore what happens when this awareness moves outward, when you stop living as the particle pushed by circumstance and start living as the observer who chooses direction, meaning, and creation. This is the turning point, where you transition from victim to creator, not through force, but through coherence. You've felt the breath, the gap, the widening sky of awareness. Now the question becomes, what changes when you carry this coherence into the moments that shape your actual life? This is where the shift from victim to creator unfolds, not as a declaration, not as a burst of motivation, but as a quiet reorientation inside your field. The victim lives entirely inside the loop. Trigger, contracted breath, narrowed state, old meaning, predictable action, familiar evidence. The creator lives from a completely different sequence. Breath state, meaning, action, new evidence, new probability. The external world may look the same, but the lens through which you meet it changes everything. The turning point is not dramatic. It's subtle. It's the moment you pause before interpreting a situation. It's the moment you breathe before collapsing an old story. It's the moment your awareness arrives before your history does. In that instant, you're no longer acting from who you were. You're acting from the observer who sees options your old self could never perceive. Creation begins in the invisible shift between breaths. Let's ground this in scenes from everyday life, three of the most charged arenas: money, relationships, and leadership. These are the landscapes where unconscious loops run deepest, and where coherence can create the most profound openings. Scene 1: money. A bill shows up, an unexpected expense. A message from the bank. The familiar tightening begins. The breath collapses high in the chest. The old meaning surges. There's never enough. I'm falling behind. This always happens. That meaning triggers the same survival action: panic, avoidance, self-criticism, or grasping. And the evidence returns to confirm the loop. But this time you pause. One oval breath, then another. The breath moves lower. The state softens. In that softer state, the meaning changes subtly. Let me see the full picture. I can respond from clarity. This is a moment, not a verdict. From that meaning, your action is different. You take responsibility without collapsing. You plan, adjust, communicate, choose. And suddenly the evidence you generate is no longer a self-fulfilling scarcity loop. It's a step toward stability. You didn't manifest money out of thin air. You changed the probability trajectory by shifting the state from which you engaged with reality. Scene 2: relationship. Someone you care about withdraws, or speaks sharply, or forgets something important. The body reacts instantly. The breath tightens. Old meanings rush in. They don't care. I'm not enough. This is about to fall apart. And from that meaning, the old actions follow: blame, shutdown, over-explaining, retreat. The loop deepens. But this time your awareness catches the breath before the story locks in. You place a hand on your chest. Inhale gently. Exhale slowly. 2 seconds of coherence. That's all it takes for a new interpretation to appear. Something might be happening for them. Let me get curious. This moment is not the whole relationship. The field shifts. You respond from stability instead of woundedness. The conversation changes. The connection repairs rather than fractures. Again, nothing magical, just a different breath, igniting a different meaning. Scene 3: leadership. This could be in a workplace, a family, or any situation where others look to you. A problem erupts. Tension rises. People react. The old loop says, fix it now. Act fast. Don't show uncertainty. From that pressure, breath becomes shallow. State becomes frantic. Meaning becomes distorted. If I don't control this, everything fails. Actions become rushed, rigid, or dominating, and the field around you becomes as chaotic as your inner state. But the coherent leader does something rare. They pause long enough to breathe before intervening. 1 breath, 2 breaths, a return to the inner horizon. The meaning softens. Let me see clearly. There's more space here than it feels. I can hold the field rather than react to it. From that meaning, the action is calm, measured, attuned, and everyone around you feels the shift. Stillness becomes leadership. Coherence becomes influence. Across all these scenes, the same pattern emerges. The victim reacts from the contracted breath of old identity. The creator responds from the coherent breath of presence. Victimhood is not weakness, it's simply unconsciousness. Creation is not force, it's awareness brought into motion. The field doesn't reward effort, it responds to coherence. This turning point is not a one-time event, it's a practice. There will be days when you forget, when the old loop takes over. That's not failure, it's part of remembering. Every conscious breath realigns you with the observer, reopens the horizon, and brings you back to the place where possibilities breathe again. In the next part, we'll step into a wider view of what this shift means not just for your personal life, but for your sense of dignity, meaning, and belonging in a world that often feels fragmented. You'll see how stillness becomes a form of subtle leadership, how your coherence becomes a kind of public art, and how choosing your breath becomes a quiet act of reclaiming your place in the human story. You've felt the breath settle, the loop loosen, the turning point take shape. But beneath all the techniques and metaphors, something deeper is happening, something profoundly human. At its core, this entire journey is not about performance or achievement. It is about remembering your dignity, your belonging, and your capacity to meet life from the quiet center within you. If the earlier sections were about mechanics, this one is about meaning, because coherence is not just a personal tool, it is a way of inhabiting the world with grace. There's a misconception that awakening makes you separate from others, as if awareness lifts you above ordinary life. But the truth is the opposite. When you shift from victim to creator, when you breathe before the moment instead of after it, you don't become detached. You become more deeply human. You begin to notice nuances you once missed: the subtle tremor in someone's voice, the heaviness they're carrying, the sincerity behind their words. Your stillness opens a listening space, and in that space, others feel safe enough to reveal what is real in them. Stillness becomes a kind of generosity. You also begin to realize that your coherence is never just yours. Every breath you take in awareness subtly influences the field around you. Your presence becomes a quiet form of leadership, one that doesn't require titles or recognition. The world is filled with noise, urgency, and emotional turbulence. When someone walks into a room carrying the calm of a mountain, the room shifts. Not because they impose anything, but because others feel themselves reflected in that stillness. In this way, coherence becomes a public art form, an invisible sculpture carved in the shared space between people. And in this deeper stillness, the idea of alignment begins to make sense. Alignment isn't about the universe rearranging itself to please you. It's about you learning to stand in the river of life without fighting its flow. When you stop resisting, when you stop collapsing into old patterns, when you breathe into presence, something extraordinary happens. Life becomes more transparent, not easier necessarily, but clearer. You begin to see that challenges are not punishments, they are invitations. Every discomfort is a messenger. Every setback is a threshold. Every moment of confusion is a doorway into a more spacious understanding. This is the quiet wisdom the ancients tried to preserve. You are not meant to conquer life. You are meant to collaborate with it. The breath teaches this more effectively than any philosophy. Breathe in, it arrives. Breathe out, it leaves. You cannot rush the inhale. You cannot cling to the exhale. Life inhales and exhales through you in the same way. When you learn to follow that rhythm instead of forcing your own, you become a participant in the dance instead of a spectator lost in thought. You might ask, what does this mean for my place in the world? It means you belong. Not because you earned it, not because you proved yourself, but because you are here alive, breathing, aware. Existence has already said yes to you by allowing you to witness yourself living. The observer within you is not separate from the field. It is the field looking back at itself through your eyes. There is an inherent dignity in that, a quiet holiness that doesn't require belief or dogma. And what about meaning? Meaning isn't something you find. It's something you generate through the quality of your presence. A coherent breath while listening to someone becomes meaning. A moment of stillness before reacting becomes meaning. Choosing openness over defensiveness becomes meaning. A life becomes meaningful not because it accomplishes great things, but because it is lived with awareness. Awareness dignifies every moment. This is why returning to the breath matters, not because it makes you more productive or more spiritual, but because it restores you to the part of yourself that is already enough. When you breathe consciously, you come home to the place within you that has never been broken, never been separate, never been less than whole. That place is not loud. It does not announce itself. It waits for you in the tiny gap between breaths, in the space behind your thoughts, in the quiet awareness that has watched every moment of your life without judgment. So let this be your human message. You matter because you are aware. You belong because you breathe. You are dignified because you can choose your state. And you are powerful because your presence reshapes the field around you in ways you may never see but others will always feel. In the final part, We will create a small ritual together, a way of anchoring this coherence in your daily life. A way of choosing your frequency not as a concept, but as a declaration. A way of breathing yourself into the observer once more, so that the shift you've begun can ripple outward long after this moment ends. Before you step back into your day, I want to guide you through a simple ritual. Not a performance, not a ceremony of perfection, just a moment of coherence. A moment where your breath, your awareness, and your intention realign into one clear signal. This is how you anchor the shift so it doesn't fade into memory but becomes part of the field you carry forward. Wherever you are, let your shoulders soften just a little. Let your jaw ease. Let the breath come naturally. You don't need to sit perfectly or close your eyes unless that feels supportive. All that matters is that you're here, in this moment, meeting yourself with presence. We'll take 3 coherent breaths together. Follow the rhythm gently, not forced, not stylized, just a smooth oval of breath that moves like a quiet wave. Breath 1. Inhale slowly, feeling the rise of your chest or belly wherever your breath chooses to begin. Pause gently at the top, sensing that tiny horizon inside you, that bright stillness where nothing is required. Then exhale in one soft arc, like a cloud dissolving into open sky. Pause again at the bottom. This is your first signal to the field. I am here. Breath 2. Inhale with the intention of coherence, not perfection, just togetherness. Let the breath weave your mind, your heart, your body into a single felt experience. Pause briefly at the top. Exhale, soft and unhurried, and sense how your inner weather is already shifting. This is your second signal to the field. I am steady. Breath 3. Inhale with awareness as the observer. Feel the breath expand into the place in you that watches everything without judgment. Pause at the top. This is the doorway, the double slit, the moment before the shift. Exhale slowly, allowing any residual tension to melt downward. Pause again. This is your third signal. I choose my state. Now, in this softened awareness, take a moment to choose one word, a word that represents the quality you want to embody as the observer moving forward. Let it arise naturally. It could be clarity, courage, stillness, truth, love, patience, presence, strength, compassion, or something entirely your own. There's no right word, only the word that feels like home in this moment. Hold that word inside your awareness for a breath cycle. Let it settle into your field as if it were a small flame lighting the inside of your chest. This word is not a goal. It is a frequency, a compass, a stabilizing tone that organizes your perception, the way a tuning fork organizes the air around it. And now, quietly or aloud, complete this declaration. I choose to, your word, as the observer. Feel the sentence sink in, not as a demand, not as pressure, but as acknowledgement. You're not forcing the universe to shift. You're aligning yourself with the version of you who can meet reality from coherence instead of contraction, from presence instead of reflex, from choice instead of history. If this journey resonated with you, if you felt even a moment of widening or softening or recognition, then I invite you to remain connected to this frequency, not for entertainment, but for coherence, for remembering, for returning to the place within you that breathes before the shift. So take a final easy breath. Let it feel natural. Let it feel like arrival. And when you're ready, subscribe to this frequency, not just the channel, but the state we've cultivated together. Because the more you anchor coherence, the more your reality will respond with clarity, alignment, and possibility. The doorway is open. The horizon is here. And your breath is the key. Step through.